The massive crystal chamber floated in space like a diamond against the black void. Inside, creatures from across the galaxy sat around a table that could hold thousands. Some had scales, others had fur. Some breathed air, others needed special suits filled with gas. But they all shared one thing. Fear. Commander Jake Sullivan adjusted his uniform and looked around the room. Next to him sat Ambassador Lisa Martinez, the only other human in a sea of alien faces. They had been here for 6 months now watching. Species after species bowed down to the Zephyrians, or get wiped out completely. The Zephyrians were giants, each one standing 12 feet tall with gray skin that looked like stone. Their leader, High Chancellor Vexthari, sat at the head of the table. His red eyes glowed as he spoke, and his voice made the crystal walls shake. "The Altarian Empire has chosen to resist," Vexthari announced. His words echoed through the chamber. "They will serve as an example to the rest of you." Jake watched as the holographic display showed 3 star systems. Each one had billions of Altarians living on planets that had existed for thousands of years. The display flickered, then went dark. In less than a day, the Zephyrian fleet had turned 3 entire solar systems into empty space. A pruka. Low hum filled the room as the alien delegates whispered to each other in their various languages. The Vel-Terran ambassador, a creature that looked like a walking tree, flashed patterns of light across its bark. The insectoid Hivmarsh clicked their mandibles nervously. Even the proud Beltherans, who could control pure energy with their minds, seemed to shrink in their seats. "Who wishes to discuss terms?" Vexthari asked, his red eyes scanning the room. One by one, species that had ruled space for millennia raised their hands in surrender. The Corvan Syndicate agreed to give up half their worlds. The Theta Collective offered their entire military fleet. The Crystalline Beltherans, masters of technology that humans could barely understand, agreed to become servants. Jake felt his jaw clench as he watched. These weren't just alien species giving up their freedom. These were civilizations older than human history, and they were all too scared to fight back. "Captain Brooks, are you getting this?" Jake whispered into his communication device. From orbit above the crystal chamber, Captain Ryan Brooks sat in the command chair of the human ship UHS Determination. The ship wasn't much compared to the massive alien vessels around it. It was small, built for speed rather than size, and it looked almost primitive next to the sleek designs of other species. "Reading you loud and clear, Commander," Ryan replied through the earpiece. "We've been monitoring their fleet movements. These Zephyrians have big ships, but they're slow, really slow. And their weapons take a long time to recharge between shots." Jake nodded slightly. Humans had learned long ago that bigger wasn't always better. Their own history was full of small, fast armies beating larger, slower ones. "The human delegation will now present their decision," Vexthari announced. His voice cutting through Jake's thoughts. The chamber fell silent. All eyes turned to the small human section of the great table. Jake could feel the weight of those stares. Some were curious, others pitying. Most seemed to expect humans to fold just like everyone else. Lisa Martinez stood up slowly. She was a small woman, barely 5.5 feet tall, but she held herself with dignity. Her voice was calm and clear as she spoke. "The United Earth government requires more time to consider your terms." A sound like grinding stone came from Vexthari's throat. It might have been laughter. "More time? Little human, do you not understand what you have witnessed here today? Species with fleets 1,000 times larger than yours have submitted. Civilizations that mastered space travel while your kind still lived in caves have bowed before Zephyrian might." Jake stood up next to Lisa. He was taller, with the bearing of a career military officer. His uniform was simple compared to the elaborate dress of other delegates, but something in his posture made several aliens lean back in their seats. "We understand perfectly," Jake said. "We've watched you destroy entire civilizations. We've Seen you turn populated worlds into dust. We know exactly what you're capable of. Then you know resistance is futile, Vexthari replied. Your species numbers barely 10 billion across 12 worlds. We have conquered empires spanning hundreds of systems. Yes, Jake agreed. We're small, we're new to space. Most of the species in this room have technology we can't even begin to understand. The alien delegates nodded. This was what they expected. To hear from humans. An admission of weakness followed by surrender. But there's something you need to understand about humans, Jake continued. We've been fighting wars since before we had words for war. We've fought each other, we've fought nature, we've fought every challenge our world threw at us. And we learned something important along the way. Vexthari's red eyes narrowed. And what is that, little human? Jake smiled, but it wasn't a friendly expression. We learned that sometimes the best way to win a fight isn't to be the biggest or the strongest. Sometimes you win by being the one willing to do whatever it takes. The chamber remained silent. Several alien delegates were fidgeting now, sensing something in Jake's tone that made them uncomfortable. We need 3 days to give you our final answer, Lisa said. Vexthari waved a massive hand dismissively. 3 days then. But know this, when you return, you will kneel like all the others, or you will burn like the Altarians. As the human delegation prepared to leave, Jake caught the eye of the Vel-Terran ambassador. The tree-like creatures. Bark patterns were flashing rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. Jake realized that some of the older species in the room were beginning to understand something the Zephyrians hadn't figured out yet. Humans were different, and that difference was about to change everything. 3 days passed like a heartbeat in the vastness of space. The crystal chamber buzzed with nervous energy as alien delegates whispered among themselves. Everyone knew what was coming. The humans would return, kneel before the Zephyrians, and another species would join the ranks of the conquered. Commander Jake Sullivan stood in the secure room aboard the human diplomatic vessel. The walls were lined with quantum communication equipment that allowed instant contact with Earth, no matter how far away they were. Admiral Patricia Ward's face appeared on the main screen, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, her expression serious. The President and the Joint Chiefs have made their decision, Admiral Ward said. Her voice was steady, but Jake could see the weight of the moment in her eyes. Operation Exodus is approved. All civilian populations are being moved to secure locations. General Kevin Thompson sends his regards and says to tell you that the Marines are ready. Lisa Martinez stood next to Jake, her hands clasped behind her back. Are you sure about this, Admiral? Once we do this, there's no going back. We've run every simulation, Ambassador. The Zephyrians won't stop with us. If we kneel now, they'll work us to death in their labor camps. If we run, they'll hunt us down eventually. The only option left is the one we're best at. Jake nodded slowly. Fighting. Fighting dirty, Admiral Ward corrected with a grim smile. Show them what humans do when diplomacy fails. The communication ended, leaving Jake and Lisa alone in the quiet room. Through the small window, they could see the massive alien ships floating in space around them. Each one represented a civilization that had chosen submission over extinction. Do you think we're making the right choice? Lisa asked quietly. Jake looked out at the alien fleet. My grandfather used to tell me stories about World War II. He said there was a moment when the world had to choose between freedom and slavery. Some countries chose to fight, others chose to submit. We know how that ended. This is different, Jake. This isn't just one planet or one war. This is the entire galaxy. That's exactly why we have to do this, Jake replied. Someone has to show them that bullies can be beaten. 2 hours later, they were back in the crystal chamber. The alien delegates watched as the human delegation took their seats. Some looked sympathetic. Others seemed eager to watch another species fall. The Zephyrians sat like mountains of stone, confident in their power. High Chancellor Vex Thari stood, his massive form casting shadows across the chamber. Human delegation, 3 days have passed. What is your answer? Lisa Martinez rose from her chair. The chamber fell completely silent. Even the constant hum of the life support system seemed to quiet down. Every eye, sensor, and recording device focused on the small human woman. The United Earth government has carefully considered your terms, Lisa began, her voice carrying clearly through the vast space. We have discussed your offer to spare 10% of our population in exchange for the complete surrender of our worlds, our ships, our technology, and our freedom. Vexthari nodded, satisfied. This was the same speech he had heard dozens of times before, and our answer is no. The word hung in the air like a physical thing. Several alien delegates gasped. The insectoid Have Marsh began clicking rapidly. The Vel-Terran ambassador's bark patterns flashed in what could only be described as panic. Furthermore, Lisa continued, we reject not only your terms, but your authority. The United Earth government withdraws from these negotiations and no longer recognizes this council's right to speak for humanity. Now the chamber erupted. Aliens began speaking in dozens of languages, their voices mixing into a cacophony of disbelief. The crystalline Beltherans pulsed with light, their energy forms fluctuating wildly. Even species that had already surrendered seemed shocked by humanity's defiance. Vexthari raised one massive hand, and silence fell instantly. His red eyes burned as he stared at the human delegation. You do not understand what you have done, little humans. No species has ever defied the Zephyrian Empire and survived. We have the largest fleet in the galaxy. We have weapons that can crack planets. We have conquered civilizations that ruled the stars for millions of years. Jake stood up next to Lisa. We understand completely. You're bigger than us. You're stronger than us. You have better technology and more ships. On paper, we don't stand a chance. Then why do you choose death? Vexthari demanded. Because we're not fighting on paper, Jake replied. And because you made a mistake. The alien delegates leaned forward, trying to understand what the human meant. You think we're afraid of you, Jake continued. You think we'll break like the others did. But you don't understand what you're dealing with. Humans don't break. We bend, we adapt, we change, but we don't break. Your words are meaningless. Vexthari said, his voice like grinding stone. Power is the only truth in this universe. We have it, you do not. Lisa stepped forward. You want to know the truth about power? Real power isn't having the biggest gun or the most ships. Real power is being willing to use what you have, no matter the cost. Empty words from a dying species. Vexthari laughed. Jake smiled then. And several alien delegates felt a chill run through their beings. There was something in that smile that didn't belong in a diplomatic chamber, something cold and dangerous. We came here to try to solve this peacefully, Jake said. We sat at your table, listened to your demands, tried to find a way to avoid bloodshed. We really did try, and you failed, Vexthari stated. No, Jake replied. We succeeded. We proved that you're not interested in peace. You only understand violence. So that's the language we'll speak from now on. The human delegation began walking toward the exit. The alien delegates watched in stunned silence as the two humans moved through the vast chamber. Wait! The Vel-Terran ambassador's voice was a desperate whisper. You cannot survive this. The Zephyrians will destroy every human world. Your species will be extinct within a year. Lisa turned back to face the chamber. Maybe, but if we're going to die, we're going to make sure everyone remembers why. As the humans reached the exit, Vextharia's voice boomed across the chamber. You have chosen extinction, humans. When your worlds burn, remember that you could have saved them. Jake paused at the doorway and looked back at the massive alien. When your empire falls, remember that you could have chosen peace. The doors closed behind them, leaving the Celestial Council in chaos. Species that had ruled the galaxy for eons sat in stunned silence, realizing they had just witnessed something unprecedented. For the first time in galactic history, someone had walked away from the Zephyrian negotiation table, and somehow that terrified them more than any threat ever could. 3 weeks had passed since the humans walked away from the negotiation table. Across the galaxy, alien species watched their long-range sensors with growing fear. The Zephyrian Empire was moving. Thousands of warships were gathering at the edge of human space, preparing for what everyone expected to be the quickest genocide in galactic history. High Chancellor Vex Thari stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Destroyer of Worlds. The massive vessel was 5 miles long and carried enough firepower to level entire planets. Around it, the greatest armada ever assembled waited for his command. 2,000 heavy cruisers, 500 battleships, and 50 planet-killer dreadnoughts. It was enough force to crush 100 species like humanity. "Status report," Vex Thari commanded. "All fleets are in position, Chancellor," reported his second-in-command. "Our scouts have mapped every human world. 12 planets, 37 stations, and maybe 300 ships total. We will be finished in days." Vex Thari nodded with satisfaction. This would be the lesson the galaxy needed. No one defied the Zephyrian Empire and lived to tell about it. But something was wrong with the sensor readings. The human worlds were showing strange activity. Ships were moving in patterns that made no sense. Entire colonies appeared to be evacuating. But their ships weren't fleeing to other worlds. They were heading into empty space. On Earth, Admiral Patricia Ward stood in the underground command center buried 3 miles beneath the Rocky Mountains. The walls were covered with screens showing the positions of every human ship and settlement in the galaxy. Next to her, General Kevin Thompson studied tactical displays with the focused intensity of a career soldier. "Operation Exodus is proceeding on schedule," General Thompson reported. "All civilian populations have been moved to the deep space stations. The Zephyrians will find empty worlds when they arrive." "What about the fleet?" Admiral Ward asked. "Captain Rachel Stone's stealth frigates are already in position. The Ghost Marines are aboard and ready for deployment. Colonel Steve Parker confirms that all resistance cells have been activated." Admiral Ward nodded. For 50 years, humanity had been preparing for this moment. Not because they wanted war, but because they had learned from history that sometimes war was unavoidable. And when it came, you had better be ready. Captain Rachel Stone sat in the commander's chair of the UHS Shadow. Her ship was barely 300 feet long, a tiny speck compared to the massive Zephyrian vessels. But the Shadow had been built for a different kind of war. Its hull was covered in adaptive camouflage that could make it look like an asteroid, a piece of space debris, or even empty space itself. "All systems green, Captain," reported Lieutenant Tony Miller from the weapons station. "The new plasma torpedoes are armed and ready." "Remember the plan," Rachel said to her crew. "We're not here to fight fair. We're here to hurt them where they don't expect it." Around the Shadow, 49 other stealth frigates waited in the darkness between stars. Each one carried a crew of 20 and enough firepower to cripple ships 10 times their size. But their real weapon wasn't there. Guns. It was their ability to strike without warning and vanish before the enemy could respond. Dr. Amanda Foster worked frantically in her laboratory on the hidden research station near Jupiter. For decades, she had been studying captured alien technology and developing weapons specifically designed to fight superior forces. Her latest creation was a virus that could infect Zephyrian computer systems, turning their own ships against them. "The upload packages are ready," she reported to Admiral Ward through the quantum communication link. "Once our people get aboard their ships, We can turn their entire fleet into our weapons. Colonel Steve Parker checked his equipment one final time. He was aboard a cargo ship that was pretending to flee from the approaching Zephyrian fleet. Hidden in the cargo hold were 50 of humanity's best Special Forces soldiers. When the Zephyrians captured the ship, they would get more than they bargained for. "Ghost 1 to all units," he whispered into his radio. "Remember, we're not trying to capture their ships. We're trying to make them afraid to sleep at night." The Zephyrian advance scouts reached the first human world on a Tuesday. The planet was called New Boston, home to 2 million humans just days before. Now it was empty. The cities were dark, the spaceports were abandoned, and the orbital stations were silent. "This is impossible," muttered the Zephyrian commander as his ship scanned the empty world. "Where did they go?" His question was answered when his ship's sensors detected a massive explosion in the capital city, then another, then dozens more. The humans had booby-trapped everything before they left. Every building, every vehicle, every piece of equipment was rigged to explode when touched. "Sir, we're detecting movement in the asteroid field near the third planet," reported the sensor operator. "Asteroids don't move," the commander replied. "Send a squadron to investigate." The 6 Zephyrian fighters that approached the asteroid field never made it back. What looked like space rocks suddenly came alive, revealing themselves as camouflaged human ships. The brief battle was over in seconds, but the message was clear. The humans weren't going to fight like anyone expected. Similar reports came in from across human space. Empty worlds booby-trapped with explosives. Cargo ships that turned into bombs when boarded. Space stations that seemed abandoned until Zephyrian boarding parties found themselves trapped in maze-like corridors filled with hidden weapons. Captain Ryan Brooks watched from the bridge of the UHS Determination as a Zephyrian cruiser tried to board what appeared to be a disabled human freighter. The moment the aliens cut through the hull, the entire ship exploded with enough force to damage the cruiser's engines. "That's the 15th one today," his weapons officer reported. "They're starting to get nervous about boarding any of our ships." "Good," Ryan replied. "Fear is a weapon too." But the real surprise was waiting in the outer system. As the main Zephyrian fleet approached what they thought was the human homeworld, they found Earth apparently defenseless. No orbital weapons, no defending fleet, no signs of military activity. Vexthari studied the sensor readings with growing suspicion. "This is too easy. Where are their defenses?" "Perhaps they have simply given up, Chancellor," suggested his aide. "Many species become paralyzed by fear when facing our might." "Not these humans," Vexthari growled. "They walked away from our table. They do not give up easily." He was right to be suspicious. Hidden throughout the solar system, human ships waited in perfect camouflage. Some looked like asteroids, others like space debris. A few had actually attached themselves to real asteroids, becoming invisible to all but the most detailed scans. The trap was set. The Zephyrians had expected to find a desperate enemy making a last stand. Instead, they had flown into a carefully prepared killing ground, where every advantage they thought they had was about to become a weakness. In the deep command bunker on Earth, Admiral Ward watched the tactical display as thousands of red dots representing enemy ships moved into position. Around them, invisible green dots showed the locations of human forces. "All units, this is command," she said into the communication system. "The enemy has entered the trap. Remember, we're not trying to win a fair fight. We're trying to teach them that there's no such thing as a fair fight." The war was about to begin, and it would be unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The first attack came from nowhere. High Chancellor Vexthari was studying the tactical display on his flagship when explosions erupted throughout his fleet. What had looked like empty space suddenly blazed with weapons fire as dozens of hidden human ships revealed themselves. "Captain Rachel," Stone smiled grimly as her stealth frigate, UHS Shadow, fired its plasma torpedoes into the side of a Zephyrian battleship. The massive alien vessel shuddered under the impact, its shields flaring and failing. Before the Zephyrians could respond, the Shadow had already vanished back into its camouflage, looking once again like a piece of drifting space debris. "Target destroyed, Captain," reported Lieutenant Tony Miller from the weapons station. "The battleship is venting atmosphere and losing power." "Good. Mark that one down and find us another target," Rachel ordered. Around them, the rest of her Wolf Pack was doing the same thing. Strike hard, strike fast, then disappear before the enemy could fight back. On the bridge of the Destroyer of Worlds, Vexthari roared in fury as his fleet took damage from an enemy they couldn't see. "Where are they? How are they hiding from our sensors?" "Unknown, Chancellor," his weapons officer replied nervously. "Our scanners show asteroids and debris, but the attacks are coming from those same locations. Then destroy everything. Blow up every asteroid, every piece of debris, everything in this system." But the Zephyrian weapons were designed for massive targets like planets and space stations. They were too slow and too powerful to hit small, fast-moving ships. Every time they fired at what looked like an asteroid, the human ship was already gone, and they ended up destroying empty rocks. Meanwhile, Colonel Steve Parker was putting his part of the plan into action. His cargo ship had been captured by a Zephyrian cruiser, exactly as planned. The alien boarding party found what appeared to be a shipment of medical supplies and a crew that surrendered immediately. "Take the humans to the detention cells," ordered the Zephyrian commander. "Process the cargo and prepare to transfer it to our supply ships." But as soon as the Zephyrians left, Parker and his Ghost Marines emerged from their hiding places throughout the ship. They moved through the Zephyrian vessel like silent shadows, placing explosive charges and computer viruses in critical systems. "Ghost 1 to all units," Parker whispered into his radio. "Package delivered. 30 seconds until fireworks." The charges weren't designed to destroy the cruiser. They were designed to disable it and spread panic. When they exploded, the ship's life support failed, its weapons systems went offline, and its communication array started broadcasting human music at maximum volume. Dr. Amanda Foster watched from her hidden laboratory as her computer virus spread through the Zephyrian fleet. Every time they tried to scan for human ships, their own computers would show false readings. Every time they tried to coordinate their attacks, their communication systems would malfunction. "The virus is working perfectly," she reported to Admiral Ward. "Their fleet coordination is breaking down. They're starting to fire on their own ships by mistake." Admiral Carl Jones commanded the human response from a mobile command center that never stayed in one place for more than 6 hours. His ship, the UHS Nomad, looked like a converted cargo hauler, but it contained the most advanced command and control systems humanity had ever built. "Status report," he requested. "Wolf Pack Alpha has destroyed or disabled 12 enemy vessels," came the reply. "Wolf Pack Beta is engaging their supply convoy. The Ghost Marines have successfully infiltrated 6 enemy ships. What about casualties?" "We've lost 3 frigates and 1 boarding team. Enemy losses are estimated at 47 ships damaged or destroyed." Carl nodded grimly. The numbers were in humanity's favor, but he knew this was just the beginning. The Zephyrians had thousands of ships. This first attack was meant to confuse and frighten them, not defeat them entirely. Commander Beth Williams led Wolfpack Beta in an attack on the Zephyrian supply convoy. Her ships emerged from behind a gas giant's moon, striking the undefended cargo vessels before their escorts could respond. But instead of simply destroying the ships, the humans did something unexpected. "Boarding teams away," Beth ordered. "Remember, we want their supplies, not their destruction." The human Marines stormed aboard the alien supply ships, but instead of fighting the crews, they offered them a choice. surrender and be treated well, or fight and die. Most of the Zephyrian supply crews chose to surrender. They were workers, not soldiers, and they had no desire to die for their empire's ambitions. Within hours, the captured supplies were being distributed to human resistance cells throughout the galaxy. Food, medical supplies, and equipment that the Zephyrians had stolen from conquered worlds were now being used against them. But the most terrifying part of the human strategy was psychological. Major Greg Turner led a special forces team aboard a Zephyrian command ship. Instead of sabotaging critical systems, they did something much worse. They left evidence that they had been there. Photos of sleeping Zephyrian officers appeared on their personal communication devices. Messages in perfect Zephyrian language warned that humans could go anywhere, anytime. Food in the officers' mess was replaced with human rations, along with notes that said, "We could have poisoned this." The effect on Zephyrian morale was devastating. Soldiers who had never known fear began looking over their shoulders constantly. Officers started sleeping in locked rooms with guards outside. The mighty Zephyrian war machine began to slow down as paranoia spread through their ranks. Dr. Helen Burke's biological research had produced another weapon entirely. She had studied captured Zephyrian prisoners and discovered that their nervous systems were extremely sensitive to certain sound frequencies. Human ships began broadcasting these frequencies during attacks, causing excruciating pain to any Zephyrian who heard them. The sounds didn't kill, but they made fighting impossible. Zephyrian soldiers would collapse in agony, unable to operate their weapons or coordinate their defenses. The humans called it the screaming frequency, and it turned every battle into a nightmare for their enemies. Captain Lavra Davis achieved the impossible when she led her boarding team onto a Zephyrian dreadnought. The massive ship was supposed to be impregnable, protected by shields and armor that could withstand planetary bombardment. But humans didn't attack from the outside. "Remember, we're not here to capture this ship," Lavra told her team as they moved through the vessel's corridors. "We're here to make them afraid of their own ships." Her team planted devices throughout the dreadnought that would cause its own weapons to malfunction catastrophically. When the ship next tried to fire its main guns, the explosion would destroy not only the dreadnought but damage every nearby vessel. The psychological effect was even more important than the physical damage. When word spread that humans could turn Zephyrian ships into bombs, crew morale collapsed entirely. Soldiers began refusing orders to board captured human vessels. Officers started questioning every system on their own ships. Back on the destroyer of worlds, Vexthari stared at the reports flooding in from across his fleet. 30% of his ships were damaged or destroyed. His supply lines were under constant attack. His soldiers were terrified to sleep. "This is impossible," he growled. "They're just humans. They have inferior technology and smaller numbers. How are they doing this to us?" His aide, a younger Zephyrian who had studied alien cultures, spoke carefully. "Chancellor, I believe we may have misunderstood their nature. Other species fight to defend territory or resources. Humans seem to fight for the simple pleasure of fighting." Vexthari turned his burning red eyes toward the aide. "What do you mean?" "Our intercepted communications show human soldiers laughing during combat. They celebrate when they complete dangerous missions. They volunteer for the most hazardous assignments. I think, Chancellor, that we may have declared war on a species that enjoys war." For the first time in his long military career, Vexthari felt something he had never experienced before. Fear. Not fear of death or defeat, but fear of an enemy that couldn't be understood or predicted. An enemy that fought not because they had to, but because they wanted to. The war was far from over, but already the galaxy was beginning to understand that something unprecedented was happening. The mighty Zephyrian Empire was being torn apart by an enemy they had dismissed as primitive and weak, and the humans were just getting started. 6 months after the war began, the impossible had become reality. The Zephyrian Empire, conqueror of countless worlds, was retreating from human space. Their mighty fleet was broken, scattered and demoralized. Ships that had once struck terror into entire civilizations now fled at the first sign of human presence. The turning point came when Colonel Nick Russell led the most audacious mission in galactic history. Intelligence reports indicated that High Chancellor Vesthari himself was conducting an inspection of frontline forces aboard his flagship. The destroyer of worlds was supposed to be impregnable, surrounded by a protective fleet and defended by the most advanced weapons in the galaxy, but humans had learned that no target was truly impossible to reach. "Remember, we're not trying to destroy the ship," Nick told his team as they prepared for insertion. "We want him alive. Dead martyrs inspire resistance. Living prisoners prove that nobody is untouchable." The mission required perfect timing and flawless execution. Human stealth ships had been shadowing the Zephyrian fleet for weeks, learning their patrol patterns and security procedures. When the moment came, a single modified fighter slipped through the defensive perimeter, its hull disguised to look exactly like Zephyrian debris from a recent battle. Nick and his team of 12 Special Forces soldiers had trained for this exact scenario hundreds of times. They moved through the massive ship like ghosts, using their knowledge of Zephyrian psychology and ship design to avoid detection. The aliens expected attacks from outside, not from within their most secure vessel. Capture itself took less than 10 minutes. Vesthari was in his private quarters, studying battle reports that showed his empire crumbling, when the humans simply walked through his door. His personal guards were unconscious before they could raise an alarm. The great chancellor of the Zephyrian Empire found himself staring down the barrels of human weapons. "You," Vesthari growled, his red eyes burning with rage and disbelief. "Us," Nick replied calmly. "Surprise." What happened next shocked the entire galaxy. The humans didn't kill their prisoner or even mistreat him. Instead, they broadcast his capture live across every communication channel in known space. Species throughout the galaxy watched as the mighty Vesthari sat in a simple chair aboard a human ship. Completely powerless. Ambassador Lisa Martinez conducted the negotiation personally. She sat across from the Zephyrian leader in a small room aboard the UHS Determination, treating him with the same courtesy she would show any diplomatic guest. "You have what you want," Vesthari said, his voice filled with bitter defeat. "Kill me and be done with it." "We don't want to kill you," Lisa replied. "We want you to understand something. This war didn't have to happen. We tried to solve our problems with words. You chose violence instead. I am Zephyrian. We do not surrender. We do not negotiate with inferior species." Lisa leaned forward. "Slightly, Chancellor, with respect, we're past that now. Your empire is broken. Your fleets are scattered. Your soldiers are afraid to fight. The question isn't whether you'll negotiate. The question is what you're willing to do to save what's left of your people." The terms humanity presented were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. They didn't want Zephyrian territory or resources. They didn't want slaves or tribute. Instead, they demanded something far more radical. Commander Frank Lopez delivered the message that would reshape galactic civilization. Standing before the rebuilt Celestial Council, with representatives from dozens of species watching in stunned silence, he outlined humanity's demands. First, the Zephyrian Empire will immediately withdraw from all occupied worlds and release all conquered peoples. Second, they will pay reparations to every species they have harmed. Third, their military will be reduced and placed under joint galactic oversight to prevent future aggression. The alien delegates could hardly believe what they were hearing. The humans weren't demanding conquest or revenge. They were demanding justice. "But most importantly," Frank continued, "we're establishing a new principle for galactic civilization. No species will ever again be forced to choose between slavery and death. No empire will be allowed to grow through conquest and intimidation. And no one will ever again have to face a bully alone. The Velteran ambassador, whose people had surrendered months earlier, spoke first. "You're saying you'll protect us? Even though we submitted to the Zephyrians?" "We're saying we'll protect anyone who asks for protection," Frank replied. "But more than that, we're going to teach you to protect yourselves. Every species that wants to learn human military tactics will have access to our instructors and technology." The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Species after species stepped forward to request human protection and training. The Crystal and Beltharins offered their energy manipulation technology in exchange for lessons in guerrilla warfare. The insectoid Hiv Marsh wanted to learn human boarding tactics. Even the proud Corvin Syndicate asked for help rebuilding their military along human principles. But the most important moment came when Vexthari himself was brought before the council. The former dictator looked older and smaller than before, the weight of defeat heavy on his shoulders. When he spoke, his words carried across the galaxy. "I underestimated you," he said, looking directly at the human delegation. "We all did. We thought you were weak because you tried diplomacy first. We thought you were cowardly because you walked away from our threats. We were wrong. What did we miss?" Lisa asked gently. "You didn't abandon the table because you were afraid to fight," Vexthari replied. "You abandoned it because you were afraid of what you would become once the fighting started. And you were right to be afraid. You became something terrifying." The galaxy watched as the most powerful military leader in known history delivered his final assessment of humanity. "We conquered through fear and overwhelming force. You conquered through creativity and determination. We made our enemies kneel. You made them want to stand with you instead. That is why you won, and why we never stood a chance." The new galactic order that emerged was built on principles humanity had learned through centuries of hard-won experience. Disputes would be settled through negotiation when possible, but backed by the knowledge that human fleets stood ready to protect the innocent. Aggressive empires would face not just one enemy, but a coalition of species trained in human military doctrine. Admiral Patricia Ward, now appointed as the first director of galactic defense, addressed the assembled delegates with words that would become the foundation of interstellar law. "We didn't want to be soldiers," she said. "We wanted to be diplomats, traders, explorers, and friends. But you taught us that sometimes the only way to preserve peace is to be very, very good at war. We learned that lesson well. We hope you never force us to teach it again." The ceremony concluded with something unprecedented in galactic history. One by one, the representatives of 47 species stood and applauded the human delegation. Not because they had been conquered, but because they had been liberated. As the delegates filed out of the crystal chamber, the Velteran ambassador approached Lisa Martinez. Its bark patterns flickered with what humans had learned was gratitude. "Thank you," it said simply. "For what?" Lisa asked. "For showing us that there's a difference between strength and brutality. For proving that someone can be powerful without being cruel. For teaching us that sometimes walking away from the table is the bravest thing you can do." Lisa smiled and looked out at the stars through the chamber's crystal walls. "We learned something too. Sometimes the best way to win a war is to make sure your enemies become your friends." The galaxy had watched in terror as humanity abandoned the negotiation table. Now they watched in wonder as humans built a new table where everyone had a seat, and no one had to fear being forced to kneel. The age of galactic empires was over. The age of galactic cooperation had begun. And it had started with two simple words that changed everything. "We refuse."